Welcome back to the channel. My name's Yusuf Arel. I'm a pharmacist in the US, and today we will be continuing our series on how new drugs are developed and brought to market. In the last video, we discussed the preclinical phase in which potentially new therapies are first discovered, developed, and then approved for human clinical trials. In this video, we are going to be discussing the clinical phase in which human clinical trials are conducted. The main goal in human clinical trials is to prove that the potentially new therapy is both safe and effective in the condition that it is treating. You can kind of think of it like a proof of concept, where the sponsor is trying to prove to the FDA that their drug is effective for the condition that it's meant to treat and that it won't harm humans outside of what is expected in terms of side effects and inherent toxicities. This phase takes multiple years to complete and is the most expensive out of the entire process. Could run up to hundreds of millions of dollars depending on how big the trials are or the type of drug being used or how expensive everything is. It's a phase that's very high risk and high reward because this is the area where most drug programs will be stopped or discontinued. But if you do have a drug that gets past all these phases and does get to market, it could be widely successful and bring a lot of money to the sponsor and to the company as a whole. But because of all this, it's in the sponsor's best interest to be very careful throughout this entire phase and make sure that everything is done correctly so that there are no unnecessary delays. And this really comes down to, for example, the type of vendors and clinical sites they choose, how they conduct the clinical trials, the clinical trial designs, the types of patients they'll enroll, and so many other things they have to worry about. But it's really paramount to their success to get everything right in this phase. So the clinical phase is split up into three parts: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. In this video, we'll just be discussing phase 1 and phase 2 trials, as they don't take as long to complete and they're not as extensive, or I guess you could say very hard to create. Phase 3 is going to be in its own separate video, as this is really the big trial that really determines if your drug will get approved, and that deserves its own thing, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But let's get started. So in phase 1 trials, this is essentially where your drug is first tested in humans. And what you're looking out for is for side effects. You're going to start documenting side effects that do occur in humans. And you're also going to establish the dosing for your drug. And this is essentially called a pharmacokinetic pharmacodynamic trial, where you're going to start recruiting people and you're going to essentially test and measure the drug's levels within the body. And from there, you're going to determine important parameters and important data points like absorption, dosing, half-life, how often a person has to take the drug to reach therapeutic levels, etc. This is basically, you're going to be establishing the foundation and the groundwork and getting all the data that you need to better understand how not only this drug affects humans, but also how the human body affects the drug. So in this trial, it's going to be usually very small. Companies will only usually recruit around 100 patients, and these patients will be usually young and healthy. They won't have the condition that's being treated, but this is like the usual case. Sometimes you'll have people recruited that do have the condition, but that doesn't usually happen. And this trial is going to be conducted over multiple months. So what's going to happen is that the person that's recruited to the trial, they will start taking the medication, whether as a tablet or injection, whatever it may be. And the scientists and the researchers are going to monitor them, and they're going to take blood levels, plasma levels, whatever levels that they need to measure the drug's levels and drug's properties. And it'll usually be done in a very controlled area where if anything does happen, the person can receive immediate medical attention. Like, it won't be just out in a building, or you won't let the patient go just like that. You're gonna make sure, you're gonna watch them and make sure that if anything does happen, they're going to be all right. You're going to measure drug concentrations within the blood, within the body. And you're going to evaluate things like the drug's effect on food, metabolism, potential drug interactions with other drugs out there, etc. You also have where you're going to have that the researchers are going to increase the dose of the drug gradually until they essentially hit a point where there's too much toxicity and be like, okay, this is the ceiling, this is like the highest dose potentially, or until they see like an effect or it reaches a certain plasma concentration. It's all just to see kind of what's the limits of dosing, what's the lower limit, what's the upper limit, what's kind of like the sweet spot you want to get into to get the most amount of benefit with the least amount of side effects and toxicity. Common side effects will be documented, so side effects that appear the most, they'll start being documented, but that list is not going to be final because as time goes on, as you test in bigger populations, other side effects could start popping up, more rare side effects could start popping up, and that all has to be documented. But here you're just creating a list right now, just looking at what's happening, what do you see right now, what could be things that we have to keep in mind as we go along, as you do have a lot of drugs where they have certain side effects that must be kept in mind. And you see this, like, for example, Chantix, which is varenicline. It's used for smoking cessation. A very big side effect that can limit how patients take the drug and limit how successful they are is nausea and vomiting. It can cause really bad nausea. And that affects the dosing, where you'll see in the labeling itself where it'll say if a patient has like very unacceptable nausea and vomiting, you could to cut the dose in half. So that's like something that they could start looking at and seeing and just start documenting during this time. And it's also here that you'll find that they'll test the formulation and see which formulation is the best for this specific drug. Could be that they need a tablet, could be that you need an injection for the drug, could be that you need a gel, whatever it may be. You're going to see which formulation works best for this drug and which one is the most tolerated by patients. Essentially, the main goal is to see what doses can be used in the next phase, what the dosing will be, and to really see if is the drug safe to now test in people that do have the condition or to test in bigger populations. So in this phase, around 70% of drugs that are tested will pass phase 1 and then go into phase 2. In phase 2 trials, sponsors and companies will now start doing small-scale efficacy studies where they're now going to test the drug in patients that do have the condition that the drug is meant to treat. This time, several hundred volunteers will be recruited. They'll all have the condition that's meant to be treated. And here the trial could last up to 2 years as you're seeing long-term how these patients are affected by the drug and how effective the drug is for their condition. In this case, the study is not going to be large enough to see if the drug's going to be beneficial in the larger population as a whole. I mean, take for example with a drug meant for treating diabetes. There's millions of patients in the US that unfortunately suffer from type 2 diabetes. Only testing in several hundred people is not going to give you a good idea on how effective the drug is. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to see, is the drug really effective for this condition in the first place, and essentially, is it worthwhile for this company to actually do the big phase 3 trial and test it in thousands of patients and see if it's really worth it to go through all that effort. The information that's gathered from this trial will help inform the researchers how to best conduct and design the phase 3 trial, and that's going to be discussed in the next video where we discuss the phase 3 trial. You also see here sponsors will continue to fine-tune the dosing and play around with the dosing, make sure they get that exactly right, and they're going to continue documenting side effects. They're probably going to see not only the same side effects that came up in phase 1, but maybe some new stuff that has to be kept in mind. So you can imagine phase 2 as sort of the preparation for phase 3. The information you gather here will help inform the company. One, is it worthwhile to do a phase 3 trial, into how to best conduct that phase 3 trial in terms of study design and different parameters that have to be tested for. In this trial, around 33% of drugs will go from phase 2 trials into phase 3 trials. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. It's a shorter video. Phase 1 and phase 2 trials, there's not that much that goes on, at least in terms of explaining it. Please like and share the video so it does well. It reaches more people that may be interested in content like this. Please comment below on what you liked about the video, on things that I can improve on, different ideas and topics I could cover next time. I really hope to see you all next time as we discuss the phase 3 trials.